Thanks, Pascal. Before we begin, there's one announcement which I just received, which is Vincent from Occupy Wall Street. I believe he said he was from the Information Working Group, if I'm not mistaken. He's in the yellow jacket in the back, and he's waving a clipboard. You can see him. He has information, very important information about, if I'm not mistaken, upcoming actions and ways you can get involved and support Occupy Wall Street. So you can talk to him at the end, and please do. Thank you everybody for coming. And I think what we're going to do is, because this story has been moving so fast, I'm going to first introduce the panel, and then I'm going to turn it over to Natasha Lennard for a couple minutes. And she will give she's been covering the story very closely and has been down at the site downtown a great deal, and she will give a rundown of the events of the last 24 hours, and then we'll just jump into the conversation. Let me introduce the panel first. We have on my far left, there's absolutely no deliberate ordering of people according to any scheme. It just worked out that way. On my far left, Jodi Dean is a political and media theorist working in Geneva, New York. Her most recent books are Democracy and Other Neoliberal Fantasies and Blog Theory, and she has a forthcoming book called The Communist Horizon, which is going to be published by Verso. Next would be Chris Maisano. He's a public librarian. He's a rank-and-file activist in DC 37 Local 1482. And chair of the New York City Local of the Democratic Socialists of America. He also happens to be a senior writer, I believe was his title, is that right?
Sure.
Okay, junior writer, at Jacobin, which is a pretty good magazine. And he and the New York City DSA have been very involved also in what's been going on downtown. Then way further to the right, just getting more and more right-wing until we finally get to Natasha, who's going to be an outright fascist. Then we have Doug Henwood, who is the editor of the Venerable Left Business Observer, host of Behind the News, the radio program, which you can hear on the internet, as well as some number of radio stations that I can never keep track of. And he is a contributing editor at The Nation, and author of fine books, Wall Street and After the New Economy. Then we have Malcolm Harris, who is a managing editor of The New Inquiry, and he's a Jacobin blogger. And blogger is your title. You were offered any title you wanted, and you took blogger. That's what I was told. It's mystifying to me. And he's also the editor of a book that I believe is still forthcoming, right? In the spring, called Share or Die, Youth in Recession, from New Society Publishers. And he has been involved in Occupy Wall Street since the very beginning, I believe, since you were at the very initial planning meetings, since before anybody practically had heard of Occupy Wall Street at all. Is this for me?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do with this? And finally, we have on my far, far, far right, Natasha Lennard, who used to be on staff with Salon.com and Politico. She currently is a freelance reporter for the New York Times. She has been reporting on Occupy Wall Street since before September 17th. In other words, before pretty much anybody had heard of it, and attended a bunch of the very earliest New York City General Assemblies where Occupy Wall Street was discussed. I also believe it's true that those of you who remember the mass arrests on the Brooklyn Bridge not too long ago, while covering that event, there was a New York Times reporter or freelancer who was arrested, and that was Natasha. And that is our panel, and that works out pretty nicely, because now I'm going to turn it over to Natasha, who will give a brief rundown of what's happened in the last 24 hours, so that will hopefully frame the discussion that's going to go forward from there. Natasha?
Thanks.
Actually, we have two. So
Is this work? Okay, cool.
is that on?
Is this on? Okay. Well, that is a good framing, I think, because the point is, I can't give you a rundown of what happened in the last 24 hours.
Can you stand up?
Sure. Yeah, are we doing that?
Sure.
People want.
the people
Okay.
demanded. So.
Yeah, I couldn't possibly begin to give you a rundown of what happened in the last 24 hours. I was in one place and a few places, and far be it from me to tell all of you who might have been there what you did over the past 24 hours. From what I know, which is all I can say, and from what my comrades and friends say, there was an announcement from Mayor Bloomberg that Brookfield, who are the official owners of Zuccotti Park, called for the space to be cleaned with police assistance. The park, some representatives from Occupy Wall Street said they would allow for partial cleaning third by third, but when it came to the early hours of this morning, it was announced that Brookfield had reneged on their request for the police to assist in any cleaning and that cleaning would be postponed. At which time, circa 5 a.m., correct me if I'm wrong, as I probably am, there was many celebrations and a few breakaway marches and activities involving numerous people who'd been at the park. And there was about 14 arrests this morning, one bloodied face courtesy of New York's less than finest, and that's what I know. But I also hear, although there's a severe lack of media attention, that there was quite an exciting banner drop opposite the New York Stock Exchange that read "Occupy Everything," but was sadly missed by the spectacle observers that be. And that's what I know from the past 24 hours.
Thank you, Natasha. Okay, so that's what's happened, and I think most of you probably know some of the other things, some of the other highlights of the things that have happened. The point here, I think, if I'm accurately quoting one of the flyers for this event that I saw, is to talk about left politics and strategy in the context of Occupy Wall Street. So rather than just going over a series of events, we'd like to talk about what it means and what people think and the different opinions that people have. So let me first start by asking a question. I guess we'll continue with the two people to my right, because I believe that they were the ones who were the only two people on this panel who were involved in this thing before Occupy Wall Street became a major national phenomenon. When people look at, when the average viewer watching this on TV or reading it in the newspaper looks at Occupy Wall Street, or when you overhear people talking about Occupy Wall Street, there's always this difficulty that people have knowing who they're talking about. Because Occupy Wall Street it's hard for people to know exactly who it is, and so if you're going to talk about the politics of Occupy Wall Street, it almost seems like it's hard to even make a coherent statement one way or the other. Is there a core of a core group of people who are the real core of Occupy Wall Street, since obviously a lot of the people who are down there are people who showed up later, or people of all kinds of political persuasions? And if so, does the core of Occupy Wall Street, if there's such a thing, do they have a politics that's well defined that you can characterize?
I'm standing. Okay. So uncomfortable doing that. Yeah, I think that's true. There's not really a there, as I think what Jodi said. It's not a subject. It's like a practice of folks, and it was from the very beginning. This isn't a coalition organization. It's an activity to occupy Wall Street. That said, there are folks who are occupying it 24/7, who are living there, and who are maintaining the infrastructure, the food, the shelter, and I give them a lot of shit in general. But we wouldn't be having this conversation at all if they weren't working their asses off all day, all night, holding that space. And I think what happened this morning shows that what we think of as like hippie drum circle kids, whatever, they're willing to go to prison for that place at this point. They've made this the least inhabitable place I can possibly conceive of, a corporate office park in lower Manhattan, into a home that they're willing to get thousands of people to defend and link their arms to support. And I don't think there is ideological coherence between those people, but when push comes to shove, when you have to draw lines, there's a group of people who can line up on one side together and protect that space and protect at least what it stands for in the imaginary. And I don't think that's everything we need, but I think that's something that's really commendable and something we wouldn't be here without that. So that sort of answers your question.
Well, I think that's a very good answer, because it goes right into the heart of some of the concerns that a lot of people who are friendly and solidaristic with Occupy Wall Street have expressed about it, which I suspect are concerns that don't seem so pressing to you. But Chris Mazzano wrote a very interesting piece on Dissent's website recently. And one of the things he said, and Chris has been down there, and he's been involved in what's going on, and he's talked with a lot of the people who are really involved in the organizing. One of the things he said was, this is not yet a movement. It has the potential to be a movement, but it's not yet a movement. Do you still think that? And that was yesterday. Things change pretty fast. But what do you mean by that?
Well, I guess I have to say that in the last 24 hours, I suppose nothing has changed to make me feel differently. Yeah, I think that this has the potential to become a mass movement, to become kind of the thing that starts a new era of social protest in the United States. But before we get to that stage, I think there are a lot of things that have to happen. I'm not actually one of the people that, at this point, thinks that kind of the relative lack of demands has been a problem, because I think that actually that the fact that it's been very, very broad and kind of nebulous to a certain extent has helped it grow to the extent that it has. But we're going to eventually get to that point. It's like we're kind of, I think maybe I'm wrong, I don't know, coming to the end of that first stage of just upsurge and exuberance, and the electoral system will intervene, the police will intervene, outside forces will start to act on this process. And at that point, I think we're going to have to start engaging with institutions and start coming up with, what it is that we want. I've been going to some meetings of kind of a self-organized working group to talk about the issue of demands. And if you're a person that cares about, if you're the kind of person like me that thinks that, we need to ultimately engage with the state, take it over, and remake society by using state power, then please come to it, because, I need help. I need a lot of help. There are people there. When do we meet? There's going to be a meeting Monday. I'll email you all, it's cool. But
He's got your email address.
Yeah, unbeknownst to you, it's fine. But it's, joking aside, although I want to make one more joke, there is this guy that thinks that there are FEMA internment camps and we need to protect our precious bodily fluids from fluoridation or whatever. But I mean, now getting serious again. Like I said, we're getting to the point where more and more people are getting involved in this, want to get involved. I don't know if people have seen recent poll data showing that over half of the population supports these protests, and we need to consolidate that, because at the moment I think it's kind of a Rorschach. It's what you want to make it, and at some point we need to formulate a program and make demands on it. And maybe we can talk about this later, but as winter comes along, I think that will kind of dampen everything. But in the spring, the state of New York is going to have a $2.4 billion budget deficit, and they're going to want to cut everything. And I really hope that this persists, and that in the spring, something like that, fighting against cuts at the state and local level, is something that we can kind of cohere something of a program and a set of demands around, because I think that's fairly important.
You raised the question of whether people want to actually engage with the state and take it over, or whether they don't, and I suspect that that's in part, at least in part, referring to the fact that there's a huge, or it seems like there's a huge participation in Occupy Wall Street of people who describe themselves as anarchists, and but none of them are here tonight, so we'll have to speak on their behalf.
I'm here.
We've got one.
Yeah. Don't say that if you don't know. It's true.
It's a joke.
It's getting too anarchic.
I said I hoped there would be a riot tonight, and maybe we'll get one. But to what extent is that true? To what extent? I mean, that's part of what I was trying to get at when I asked about, what is the political content of whoever the core of Occupy Wall Street is, because it seems one gets indications that there's a lot of anarchism. How much anarchism is there? What does that mean that people are anarchists? To what extent are people are people, you know, really well versed in and feel like they have a strong conviction around anarchism, and to what extent is it just sort of like the influence, the sort of the broader influence that anarchists have seeped into the movement into various movements over the last 10 or 15 years? This is a question for both of you, really, but Natasha, why don't you
I
start?
thought we were supposed to be talking about leadership.
And so we are. I think talking about leadership and anarchism is not necessarily distinct. Maybe I'm wrong. To answer you, Seth, I think it is a contradiction in terms to ask about whether there's a core of anarchism going on here, because every as a reporter, every anarchist I've spoken to has appropriately given a non-ideological stance of, I can speak for myself at the park, and that's what they preface everything with. And the people who would self-define as anarchists, however difficult that is to do, and whatever that means, to use an active verb for something that's in many ways self-denying. But no, I think yes, there's a lot of people who would self-define as anarchists who very much find space and interest in Zuccotti Park because of the fact that it hasn't been consolidated as some have asked for it to be, and find potential in that, and the praxis and practice of being in a space and experimenting is exactly what this is about for a lot of anarchists I've spoken to, and myself included. And so I don't think you could call that a core. I think you could call that autonomous actions finding opportunity in a space that will always continue to avoid being a core. And once they're a core, if they're calling themselves anarchists, well, it's an odd form of anarchism indeed.
Jodi?
I just want to take issue with the claim that the idea that I can speak for myself is non-ideological. That is an ideological position that's part of a highly individualist tradition in the United States. It hurts understanding collectivism. It even, I think it doesn't even recognize what is I would say, the miracle of what's been going on Occupy Wall Street. It's not that everyone was speaking for themselves, it's the opening of a collective space and a collective venture. So I think as long as people talk in these individualistic terms, that collective side of it gets lost.
Can I respond? I totally agree with you, Jodi. I think what I should have noted, and what I would note, is that people can only speak for themselves, but the self would be under erasure there, in that the self is then held into question, as any sort of post-structuralist thought leading you through anarchist would push you towards. But I don't think saying I can only speak for myself, as in saying I couldn't begin to use, yes, I would agree, an individualism that our society has definitely had inscribed upon it and continues to inscribe upon itself. I can only speak for myself, the only is the operative there. And of course these spaces are being opened up, but no, I would say that there is a way of saying I can only speak for myself, and the self working under some concept of erasure, but not wanting to deny any notions of autonomy by saying I can speak for a group, which would also import a different type of individualism, as in an individual as representative that has equally been inscribed upon in neoliberal society.
I got curious earlier today and looked up the root of the word autonomy, because it's been floating around so much, and it means law to oneself. And I thought that is a problem, a bit of a problem, this notion of autonomy, when, as Jodi pointed out, what we're seeing and what has made this movement or activity, or whatever you want to call it, so far so powerful, is that it is a creation of a collectivity. And it seems like the ideology has not caught up with the practice, even though so much of the claims about what this is all about is that it's a practice. But when I hear that it's not a movement, but it's a practice, it's about occupying a space, it's about somehow prefiguring a better society, I really wonder how thought through that is. I mean, a few hundred people in a square is not that can just get together, talk. and come to some kind of agreement on consensus now and then is not the prefiguration of how to organize a large and complex society. It can't be done. You need some notions of organization and hierarchy. It kind of reminds me of the Seattle moment in 1999. I was there. It was very, very exciting, but it was also an emotionally driven thing, and it sputtered out because it was so difficult to transform that energy of the moment, which sort of, even though it didn't come out of nowhere, there's a lot of preparation that went into it, it did seem like a spontaneous eruption, and it's hard to turn that into something that can build and carry on and develop into something that really changes everything. Seattle was a wonderful moment, but how much about the neoliberalization of the world economy for the next decade? It was a great moment, it felt really great, but it didn't really, it was not transformative in that way. I think it's really urgent to think about ways of organization that are not, like old-style, secretive, authoritarian, Bolshevik, and also not so loose that they can't accomplish anything. Somebody pointed out to me on Facebook, of all places today, that the Spanish movement, on which a lot of this is based, has fallen apart. And as far as I can tell, they haven't really done much of anything since August. It's really hard. I don't know if that's true, correct me if I'm wrong. But if that is true, I think that's a very serious problem that people should be thinking and talking about. Now, what's inspiring about all this is it's got people to talk about Wall Street and inequality and the incredibly disgusting organization of this society. These are things I've been writing about for 25 years, and it's really nice to see people actually talking about this in the larger sphere and not just in a small little circle of people who basically agree with each other. But what do we do with that conversation? On Chris Marzano's cited Adolf Reed's great little essay on solidarity, which I brought along and read in the subway coming over here, which I hadn't read in a couple of years. And Adolf drew a distinction between the politics of bearing witness and the politics of building solidarity through action, working together in a common goal. An awful lot of left politics has been about bearing witness. It's about expressing, self-expression. And I think that urge just to speak for oneself is a form of self-expression. It's not something that can develop into something that can really survive and develop some kind of real power. I'm with Chris. I want to take over the state and change things profoundly. I think a lot of people don't want to engage with the state. They think that will lead to very, very bad outcomes. So I think these are, it's inspiring, but I'm concerned that it will flame out and we'll be stuck in the mud still.
So there's this conflation in sort of what Doug was saying between neoliberal subjectivity and autonomy, as if what we want the autonomy to do is like buy the right kind of jeans or whatever, the way that Seattle was co-opted by capital. We think of that's what autonomy must mean, is that's the only way we experienced it. But there are no people who work together more, who are more committed to working in groups and solidarity than anarchists, anti-authoritarians, and autonomists. We know because we're all using the same process that anarchists have been using for years, and it's finally working. So I think Doug wrote that neoliberalism couldn't conceive of a kind of dissent that was less threatening than this. And I think that's manifestly untrue, right? That a journal article or a socialist paper, for example, have been clearly a lot less threatening forms of dissent to the state than this, right? Union marches, non-profit coalitions, all of these have been far less threatening to capital and the state than the Occupy Everything. I think in terms of the state reaction, it falls somewhere between like animal liberationists and like armed anti-government fundamentalists. Like right in the middle of there is Occupy Everything. And you see that if you go back a couple years to where these slogans first came from, and who was developing the idea of occupation as a tactic and strategy in the US. And it was ultra-left communist insurrectionaries at the Universities of California, writing Occupy Everything on their like bathroom walls and stuff. And then that became it's totally true. I mean, there are other origins of occupation, right? We've been doing it for a while. But the slogans that we have now, Occupy Everything, Demand Nothing, even the format for the discussions we're having comes out of that tradition. And it's freaking working. we're talking about, every day we have a new critique of like, well, here's how, if we want it to work, here's how it's going to have to be organized. And it's like, well, we're all out here, so don't fix it if it ain't broke yet.
Yeah, I kind of just actually want to contest the claim that, I don't know, some autonomous and interactionists in the University of California invented the occupation a couple of years ago. The sit-down strike was...
Come on. The slogans were used.
No, but, you said that, there's no one that, out there that operates on the same kind of model and basis of solidarity as anarchists, autonomists, etc., etc. The sit-down strike was invented, decades ago by unionists. It wasn't a bunch of kids running around the University of California writing stuff on the wall. And I agree with you that, right, yeah, in an actual institution that they have some sort of power in. And that's actually something that I wanted to segue into is, so far I agree that, yeah, this has been brilliant and has succeeded, I think, where, say last year's One Nation Working Together rally in Washington failed utterly. But, then where does this go? This is a tactic. Occupation is a tactic. It's not a strategy, it's not a movement, and it's not a program. Part of me feels like, people just expect tactical victory to pile up upon tactical victory, and then at the end you have some sort of revolution, and we've all figured out how to organize production and governments. I just don't see it. I just want, because this sort of perspective, I guess, has taken the lead in what's happened so far, I just want to see, or some sort of better explanation as to where the sorts of folks that are advocating the continuation of this sort of approach, where will it go? Like, where is the project to undermine neoliberal or capitalist ideological hegemony? Where is any of this? How do you appeal to the majority of the people out there that say that they support this movement? They can't just be occupy, occupy, occupy. It has to be something else. There has to be strategic and political thinking and action. And I just want to hear a little bit more about that, because I haven't heard of any of it, honestly.
Is there? When you talk about insurrection, occupation, and these kinds of tactics as posing a particularly serious threat to the powers that be, what is the ultimate thing that you think the powers that be are fearing? In other words, what is your image or scenario in which these kind of tactics ultimately have an effect beyond, making everyone talk about inequality and social domination and all the rest of it, but actually fuck shit up for the ruling class? What kind of scenario do you see where this kind of action actually breaks through in that way?
Well, I definitely don't foresee, but I think here's where's going to be a sticking point in these kind of conversations, as is often the case. We're using power in different ways, and we're using success in different ways, and we're using better in different ways. So if you say the powers that be, it's a classically Foucauldian point. I don't think the powers that be only enact as repressive forces from above. I see them often reproduced and constituted in how we govern and how we governmentalize ourselves. So things that can be broken down through new political spaces, new interactions, new sorts of relationality and experiments, those in and of themselves challenge the powers that be, in that the powers that be don't just come from Washington or the stock exchange and enforce themselves on us. They're everywhere, and they're in all of our coded relations. So yes, if you, in the past 2 weeks, have interacted in an uncoded way, or a way that you didn't expect, or a way that was totally surprising to you, not based on how you assumed you should relate to the people around you, that is a challenge to the powers that be. That might make you think differently about how you live, eat, work, fuck, spend. And that, I think, will challenge the powers that be in the more traditional sense of the people that you would say financially benefit from the kind of uniform governmentality, i.e. like Washington, Wall Street. So no, I don't think the powers that be, their feeling and affect is necessarily a relevant metric for new relationality and success, if you will.
I think that sounds great, but I also think that that's what in a lot of ways what capitalism does is it gets us to have all sorts of great experiences and see things in different ways, and then someone else profits from it. And that's exploitation, and that has got to be stopped. I mean, I actually think we should try to move away from the kind of rhetorical gestures around, autonomy and anarchism and all of that, and really move more towards the discussion of strategy and demands. I mean, in my view, what really matters is asserting a number of things are as common, right? Water is common. Communications are common, transportation is common, education is common, health is common, food is common. If those things are celebrated as common and governed as common, not properties of the market and not something controlled by a state that is itself controlled by finance capital, then we've got something. So I actually think that a kind of set of goals that emphasize a sphere that, a set of spheres that are our common are what matters. Not kind of like, oh, do I feel a little differently about you because I now saw you in a park and sat in the rain drumming? That's great, but that doesn't change very much.
Just a 2-second. Actually, I mean, Doug.
Oh, I just want to make a very quick point, which is that most of the people who are responding sympathetically in the broad population, and there is certainly a sizable number of them, and the publicity this thing has gotten has been remarkable. Even Nancy Pelosi has felt she had to support it. But the people who are responding to it want jobs, they want schools, they want health care. They don't want to recode the shit in their heads, they just want in, They want a piece of the action. They are pissed off that the guys in the top 1% or top 1/10 of 1% have gotten all the action and they haven't gotten any. They want inclusion. They don't really want to have this Foucauldian experience.
Well, and I think that's one side of what people want, right? Because that's not the only thing people want. They also want to take the banker out of his, fucking tower and string him up in the public square, right? That's not like just the crazy left. That's everyday folks talking about their experiences and like, this is America, right? We want to talk about we're the 99% as if we're also not the 99% that loves Transformers 4, right? As if this is the 99% that doesn't also like feel passionate anger. All we want is like, our little appropriate piece of the pie, and we just want to be friendly. And the capitalists know that's not the case, right? If we want to read what the capitalists think about this, you can go look at what Glenn Beck says, right? He's got a better analysis than most of the people on the left about where this could go, how threatening this pie. I think he's like one of those fortune tellers who like 99% of the time is just totally bullshitting everyone, and then 1% of the time his eyes roll back in his head and he's got like divine insight. Like, no, it's the coming insurrection. I've been reading these French guys. No, but seriously, to give a like, we're going to recode our subjectivities, that's what we're going to do next. No, this is a directly antagonistic movement. This isn't something where we just want to fit in next to the bankers. And, they're really important movers of capital, and the sort of liberal programmatic answer of, well, they serve an important role, they've just been taking too big of a slice. I don't think that's the case.
Just one thing, I don't think that I'm not speaking for Doug, but the way I understand Doug's point is not that people, want to be bankers too or want just a piece of the pie. The real situation is that capital can't accommodate everybody. Capital can't do it anymore. And that's the message that's got to be clear all the time. It's completely broken. It doesn't work. And the only way to move forward in a way that's basically not feudalism is going to be some kind of primarily common system.
Can I ask Jodi a question?
Okay.
Oh, sorry. No, you go ahead.
Yeah, I'm actually glad that Malcolm brought up the right, because I actually have been taking a peek here and there at what the right has been talking about. I would submit that Glenn Beck isn't necessarily the best person to be following on this. I've been trying to follow kind of, as serious as you can get over there. But a good person to read actually right now is Bill Kristol had an article today. I stumbled upon it on the internet.
Admit it.
All right, I'm subscribed to the Weekly Standard. It's true. No, I'm not. But he absolutely dismissed the protests as pure idiocy. These people don't know what they're talking about. They're just hanging out in a park with, topless and painting their faces with feces or something. But he made a really, I think, important point. And what he said is that basically he was almost kind of thrilled that this was happening because now this gave the right an opportunity to articulate an alternative program and kind of capitalize on people's legitimate discontents, which he recognized, and to take advantage of it. And I'm really, really afraid that if we on the left do not take advantage of this potentially transformative moment to project and advance a positive project that actually speaks to people and could offer them some sort of real gains in their lives, then the right could just as well step in and take advantage of it. They've already started. He harkened back to Reagan, and he spoke of an intellectual and a policy surge. I would love for us to have an intellectual and a policy surge so that we can actually, offer people more than just experiences in a park, like Jodi was talking about.
Can I ask it? I'm sorry. Do that. No, I appreciate that, and I just have a couple of questions about the notions of commonality you're using and what we can offer people and who this we that we're offering. You talk about water, you talk about jobs. What about subjectivities? This is not people playing an experience in a park. This is how you this is how you are read. This is how you have to be. This is how you fuck. This is how you get food. And who gets to count when we create policies and programs based on notions of a majority or a commonality? I don't know what I have in commonality with you. Yes, we probably all eat. But am I looked at the same way as some of you are? No. And have I had to deal with the same things some of you are because of what's coded and what's assumed? Absolutely not. And if we start assuming commonalities as certain things that we can definitely unite upon, that is only by definition going to exclude those that don't either fall in line or fall outside. So either we start interpolating people and coding people and tell them to fall in line, or we start the same exclusionary politics that can create this notion of a 99 and 1% in the first place.
Politics requires a division, right? That's why the 99% is a good slogan, because it doesn't say everyone agrees, right? You can't just presume, if you want a political movement, there has to be something that you're against, and there has to be a division. If it's everyone, then it's not politics, and it can be like, I don't know, the ocean or social or culture or something. But there's got to be a kind of division, and the thing is that capitalism relies on this division, and we are deluded if we think that we can pretend that that division's not there, right? We have to occupy the division and use that as a mobilizing point.
I think that's absolutely the case, and this is why I've actually got sort of a problem with the way the 99% rhetoric's being used, not necessarily in itself, but when you're walking down Wall Street or K Street, which I've seen crowds do both places in the last month, chanting, "We're the 99% and so are you." That's just wrong. There has to be a 1%, or else 99% just means everybody. While you're talking to the 1%. So I think that's true, and that line needs to be not just something you're against, but also someone you're against.
Actually, just to be fair, I think most people try to direct that towards the cops, which is
not part
which is somewhat problematic, but just for clarity's sake.
And actually, this practice of occupying could come to an end at any moment when the NYPD finally loses its patience and Bloomberg finally loses his patience. I think that's part of what happened in Spain. The police just said no more, and the movement kind of evaporated, as far as I can tell, only on the basis of instant research. Said, well, where did it go? I mean, it's been 2 months, and we haven't heard from it. But so, what happens when the cops finally say no more? What lives beyond that? This is going to happen in many other places around the country and around the world that have imitated this model. At some point, the cops are going to... the state is really something you just can't disengage from and say, oh, I don't want to... You twinkle at it and say, I don't care about it. It's going to, crack your head. So what do you do when it happens?
Can I maybe respond to that? We have some... my friends and I, you guys all included, some people have really looked into what's happening in Spain. And it is the cops, but it's not the cops you're thinking of. It's the ununiformed, paid-for cops who decided to police the square themselves in a very strict way. There was a talk at, I don't know, maybe some of you were there, a gallery that's just recently located to Greenpoint, used to be in Williamsburg, called No Space, and a young woman who has been very involved in the square in Spain came and spoke about how they divided into committees, and it was very organized, and they organized demands, and they got rid of the drunks, and they got rid of the homeless. Brilliant. And then everything divulged into small committees in locales with separate demands, and it fizzled. And yes, there are many narratives, and I can't speak for all of them. This was the narrative I heard. And so yes, they policed themselves into something that wasn't exciting and didn't create opportunities and wasn't opaque enough to allow for new possibilities. They created a shadow government within the government they already had. And I think that is a risk that Occupy Wall Street faces, as much as the baton-wielding, helmet-wearing monsters who seem to actually push the movement into a more exciting place every week.
Actually, I have a question, which is,
Can we get some audience questions?
oh, yes, let's start doing it.
Did you just start the Q&A? Because everyone here seems like we have questions. Let's just end the
We thought we were going to do that, but that did not materialize. Yes, please go ahead.
That's my question. Can we do the Q&A?
So we have to decide this by consensus.
Oh, as long as they're real questions, please. Real questions.
Real questions.
None of this, none of this.
Well, what is it? Do you guys think that we've sort of laid out the shape of the debate, and that maybe the audience questions will give us a new?
Sure.
As long as they're...
Okay. All right, let's do that. Gentleman over there in the glasses.
Hey everyone. Great. Thank you everyone for putting this together. I have a quick question. It strikes me as the big difference is the theory of vanguardism. Because, I mean, nothing is preventing Jodi from going down to Occupy Wall Street with the list of 7 commons, convincing 90% of the people there and taking it over. But it seems like there's much more of a conscious theory from some people that there's a vanguard who needs to lead or at least move the movement in a certain way, where the people are actively anti-vanguardism. So I kind of wonder if you guys could elaborate on that.
Defend your vanguardism.
We want to formulate a question.
I guess I don't really know how to answer the question. I don't think that I'm defending a vanguardism. I think that I'm defending a view that says that the movement is better off pushing in a communist direction, and that, you know, I'm trying to persuade everyone here that that's the case, right? So I don't see why that to support that view means vanguardism rather than a position to be persuaded and pushed like any other one.
Yes, ma'am, right there in the.
Oh, don't call me ma'am.
I'm very, very sorry.
Jesus Christ. I would like to ask you, I share a lot of the dynamics of your thinking in the sense that we are not joined at the hip, okay? Human beings are not joined at the hip. We have to communicate. We have to share. We have to connect in some way in order to be empowered. That's my view of communism. Okay. Now, one of the slogans in the '60s was, of which I was part of. I'm a touchy-feely new lefty, or that's what I was called. Is we want to participate in the decisions that affect our lives, and that wasn't only the whites, but also the black movement. Let the people decide. Okay? People have to make decisions. Part of what the state is, I don't know, I mean, you all are talking about, like, old lefties, talking about the state. What is the state? What kind of relationships constitute the state? The state is a group of people who are making decisions, which we, according, I'm sorry, I forgot your name. Natasha talks about the we that exists, right? The separated, alienated we, allows to exist. We allow them to make those decisions that affect our lives. And that's, to me, what the state is. I mean, it has to be individual people getting together and making certain kinds of decisions that are then acted upon, or given sanction and then acted upon. Okay? I mean,
is there a question?
I don't know. I'm very uncomfortable with this format. I don't have questions to ask these people. You know, I mean, the people in this room.
Okay, well, let's
get one, that healthcare is something that everyone has, and that financial corporations don't rule the world. To determine those things would be something that could only be done together, but not everyone will agree with that. And so there still has to be lines that say, okay, rich guy capitalist, you don't agree, so we have to take your stuff. Right, so I don't.
I have a question to pose, and then we're going to get to a question that's waiting here. It's a very simple question, and it's for the two individuals to my right. It's a simple question, which is, do you think that the tactics that you're celebrating could achieve, let's say, free college?
Well, we haven't talked about tactics at all. We've talked about...
You talked about tactics at the beginning.
I'd like to talk about tactics. Tactics involves moving our bodies into places,
okay.
And we haven't talked about that at all.
Can that get free college?
Not before we abolished college. I don't know. Free college. We had free college, right? Okay, here's a line from the...
England had free college and it was still as posh as fuck.
Yeah, well, here's a line from the people who may not have started the idea of an occupation, but certainly invented the slogan "Occupy Everything," which was that a free university in a capitalist economy is like a reading room in a prison. And I think part of what Jodi was saying was these demands can't possibly be met by capitalism, right? These are, we want full employment. Well, we know capitalism can't give us full employment, but we still want it. And because what we really don't want is capitalism itself. That's what she said. Yeah, I know. This is why I'm agreeing. I'm saying that it seems like Doug thinks these are demands that capitalism, or not capitalism, but some sort of structure without a revolution. I'm not sure if Doug's talking about a revolution here, where it seems like Jodi sort of is, with the same sort of demands.
So, I mean, basically the answer is, if there was a short answer, it'd be no.
Yes, but why short answer? We're talking on different terms. 1960s, my parents, England, university was entirely free. And it was entirely privileged, and it was entirely for the few. So if you're talking free education for all, who is your all? So free college, this is not a solid metric. This is not a commonality we can just understand, because they're nuanced. What is college? What does it mean? What does it reproduce? And who's it for? And who is this all? And yes, there was free university in England, and that's who. And I promise you, David Cameron went to it. So
that confuses me. But in New York, we had free tuition at the City University of New York from 1847 on the basis of a municipal referendum to 1975, fiscal crisis in New York City, which was really the opening act of neoliberalism in the United States. It was a great rehearsal. In fact, there was an op-ed in the New York Times during the fiscal crisis that said, New York City is a great experiment in rolling back the promises of the 60s. If we can do it in New York, the most difficult environment in the country, we can do it anywhere. And it did it. Now, the imposition of tuition at CUNY was was done by Felix Rohatyn, the investment banker who ran New York City in the mid and late 1970s, and he said explicitly that he knew this was not fiscally important. The actual amount of money was small, but it was important for the shock value. It is possible to have free tuition, and CUNY is not an elite institution. It's not David Cameron's kind of school. It is a mass institution that is wonderful and inspiring in New York City, even now it's no longer free. I mean, that's the model we're talking about. And I'm not sure that people getting together in a park can accomplish that. I mean, Seth is asking a very important question. How do you get from this gathering to that goal? I don't know. And it'd be nice if I'm not asking, this is something we need to think about. I don't have the answer. We're talking about it. It's important that we're talking about it, but it is something we need to think about, how to get beyond this, this Foucauldian recoding into something that actually can change the way people live. I think there's also a dispute here about representative democracy. I think a lot of us I believe in some version of representative democracy. I don't think most people want to spend their lives in meetings. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is just because we're distorted by living in capitalist society and a hierarchical society. But the too many meetings critique does have is somewhat compelling. I don't think people want to be engaged in the details of economic planning. I believe in a more planned economy for sure. I would love to see some sort of revolution. But I don't think people want to delegate things. They don't want to spend their times, just like consensing. This is fine for a few hundred people who get together who don't have a lot else to do and are deeply motivated. How long that can last, how you can, as they say in the business world, scale that up is beyond me.
I just want to make one brief point on the question of delegation, which really does run counter to so much of the imagery that comes out of, or the rhetoric that comes out of this movement. And there's a certain sense in which one could argue, and others will certainly disagree, but one could argue that there is a certain liberation from the need to involve yourself in the endless process of making every decision in your life, and that freedom is in part about that. And if you think about a CEO, for example, who is one of the most empowered people in the society, is he the person who's spending hours and hours and hours of his day every day going over the details of the affairs that affect him? No. When he has a tax problem, does he spend all of his time with a green eyeshade and a bunch of papers in front of him? No, he hires somebody else to do it for him because he wants to be free. When he has a legal problem, he hires a lawyer so that he doesn't have to be involved in running his own affairs at that level of detail because he wants to be free. And so to me, I think that's a form of freedom that is ignored by this idea of freedom as an endless meeting.
Yeah, actually, I kind of wanted to follow up on that. Actually, a lot of times when I hear about these sorts of visions of people just constantly in assembly and making every decision that has to happen in their life, it reminds me of the Bush vision of the ownership society, right? Where everyone has to have their own health savings account. Everyone has to have their own individual savings account, and so on and so forth. And you have to constantly be managing everything all the time. And it's up to you. All the risk is on you. I don't want to do that. And I don't think anyone else here does either. And this kind of gets back to the question about vanguardism before. It's like the people over here aren't talking about vanguardism. I think actually what's going on now, for the most part, down there, because it's kind of hard, I think, to deny that there's not a small group of people that is more or less guiding the proceedings down there. It's the people that can make the commitment, can be there all the time, have decided that this is the process that we're going to follow, and are basically directing it. I mean, there's a reason why it's the same guy that's the spokesperson in every article. It's a reason why these sorts of, I think, the same people are turning up all the time and seem to be making all the decisions. And it's why, in a General Assembly meeting, people don't actually get to make a decision. People kind of just go along with whatever. There's not, to me, that's not a vision of what democracy is. If anything, I think, we would like to make it more democratic down there. And you don't do that, I think, just by having the proceedings guided by people behind the scenes and just kind of very vague General Assemblies worth very little in the way of structure or decision making.
Yeah. I think that's absolutely right. I'm not defending the committee spokesperson and the long consensus meetings for everything. Bhaskar had me come in here and defend consensus, but I'm the one who's lurking on the edge of the park, being like, okay, when are we done with this? Let me talk with my friends instead. Those people are the people who are doing work groups, who are making sure that the stuff happens, like the food gets done, and who are coming together to put in work in committees and aren't taking any sort of representative role other than like, okay, we need to organize ourselves in a way that the food gets here and gets distributed to people. That's awesome. That is also completely different from a spokesperson who says, well, the media committee, which is a group that gathered outside of this meeting and all got each other's emails, decided that I'm going to be the spokesperson now, and so I'm like some dude who now speaks for the occupation. But I think the problem with what you were saying, Chris, is that, once again, it's not an organization. You can't trust those people, right? They can say that, but it's not true. There are all sorts of people doing all sorts of things. And when you get into the street, and when you come to a bridge and it's forked and there's a pedestrian way and a motor roadway, it doesn't necessarily matter what those committee folks said to the police, for example, or think. It matters what the giant mass of throbbing people want to do. or can be convinced to do, or or what they feel at that moment, which has a lot to do with what Natasha was saying, right? There's a tactical virtue to the sort of remaking of the self collectively, and sort of becoming collective. We aren't just collective, it involves a process of becoming. And right now a lot of that's happening on the street, not just in those meetings. So beware of self-appointed spokespeople.
More questions. Why don't you pick somebody to do a question?
Thanks. I have a question, but I also want to make a tiny statement just because I've been at the park a lot, and I think that while the General Assemblies are really large and really unwieldy sometimes, it's the direct democratic process that people want to participate in. And as the movement grows larger, there's been a lot of questioning by people who work full-time, people who are in the park full-time, about how we're going to make big decisions and how, if we do overthrow things, how we would organize ourselves. And the spokes council model that's been talked about is really effective, not having spokespeople, but having spokes from different groups, affinity groups or working groups, like spokes on the wheel that rotate, and it's just one person talking at a time for efficiency, but it's not a spokesperson. And so even though the GA is really unwieldy in making collective decisions about money, it's really effective. And I have a question about if occupation is, one stage of this revolution or this movement, and there's different ways to move forward, different tactics, different things. I'm just really curious about what you guys think that they are, because I've been thinking about that a lot too, and I really want this to keep going, but I understand the kind of inertia that brought it with all people running to the park. That's kind of dying down a little bit. So I really came here to brainstorm with people about what is the next step, because we're all in this movement.
I think it's an awesome question. I think what was interesting about the park at first, and what was interesting about the bridge, is that it did occupy people. It didn't just occupy the movements of the city and a certain space. People were occupied with it. They couldn't stop thinking about it, and there was a huge conversation about it. What else can you think of? Keep the flows of the city occupied, that would keep people's minds occupied on thinking of new ways of interacting and new ways of expressing ourselves politically. And I don't know, right? But I think that's what we need to think about. Not just occupation in terms of a stable notion of space to sit in, but what genuinely occupies in terms of holds up flows, in terms of makes people occupied in their minds otherwise. And I think a refiguring of what occupation means will be very important when it comes to moving beyond thinking about that bit of concrete in downtown Manhattan.
There are a lot of banks around. Some of
Just saying.
The doors open and close, generally independent of who opens and closes them. Just saying.
And that is all. No, it was up to you to pick the next question. Oh, yeah.
I'll keep it brief. So I think for me this meeting has been great, but also very strange because it's so unlike everything happening in Zuccotti Park. There are real arguments happening here, which I think is both surprising and good at the same time. I think part of what was surprising about Zuccotti Park or Liberty Plaza was that so many people from the very loosely defined left came together and decided to overcome their differences, and I don't see much of that happening here. And yet I think, from my view, the anarchists have brought just a charge to this movement that the old leftists simply haven't. And so I both see a sense of condescension on the part of the old leftists, which is odd given that all the energy at the beginning seems to be coming from the anarchists. At the same time, the anarchists also are incredibly condescending to the old leftists for reasons that just seem, insipid. They are, or impatient, as if you have all the answers already. So my question is, what commonality do you have? I think her question about what is next is to everyone here. How do you work together?
Let me try to answer your first question just by relaying a very brief and not particularly interesting anecdote. But before this event, I had an email exchange with one of the panelists who was expressing disagreement with something that one of the other panelists wrote, and I responded, and I said, "But we're all comrades, right?" And he said, "Oh yeah, absolutely," and there was no doubt about that. So even if there's disagreement, I mean, you said you want to work through disagreements, or discuss disagreements. It's something that you haven't seen as much of at Zuccotti Park. The disagreements, when they come up, they're disagreements. But it doesn't necessarily mean, it shouldn't have to mean, that everyone is at each other's throats and
there's
are
no
unwilling.
attempt here to find common ground.
I don't think
so
so
far.
far. I mean, I don't think that's true.
No. I will say that I've been inspired by what's happened, and I've just the way it's inspired conversation among a broader population is tremendous. So I mean, that's I'm incalculably thankful for that, and I hope it continues. But what I'm concerned about is this is going to flame out. That's what I'm worried about. How do we take this wonderful moment and make it bigger and more lasting and more powerful, and actually change things instead of just being a form of self-expression? Many years ago, my wife, Liza Featherstone, and Christian Parenti and I wrote a piece called On Activistism. And our thesis was, among other things, that a lot of left action was just about producing actions and recruiting more activists. And I think there's that risk that this is going to happen with this, that it's all about the practice, all about the site, all about the process, and then I think this is now reinforced. We have to do, I think, an update of this piece for the new media world, because the new media world, everything is reported in real time. So we can see this pig cop who pepper sprays somebody in the face, but there's not much of an opportunity to sit, and this is one of the things that this is good about, that's good about this event, is that we can talk about really important differences and think about what we're doing and talk explicitly about what we're doing instead of just living in the eternal present. I mean, we have to think about how this articulates with a broader population and the future, and not just that eternal present.
And by the way, that is perhaps mission number one that Jacobin as a magazine sets itself, just to make that point.
Quick question. Well, actually, 2 points. One of them is about tactics, and particularly around I understand the role of, as in other movements, some movements have failed, and lots of people talk about this because as they escalate, right, formal organization then gets in the way and de-escalates, right? So there is this point, and it's a well-studied, good point, right? And so I think like the idea of increasing disruptive tactics, and sort of the notion of the sit-down strike is a really good example, right? So I just want to hear a little bit about within the conversations around Occupy Wall Street, has there been a discussion around escalating tactics in terms of disruption? My second question is around the implications or impact or potential impact of this being a very sort of white movement, right? Not very diverse, and what do you all feel is the long-term or short-term impact, or are there is there stuff going on in terms of trying to diversify this movement a little bit?
Yeah, pass that mic around a little bit.
Make comments.
I mean, I don't know. You want someone else in the 2K?
Yeah, I am an anarchist, and I felt that is, I want not to take over the state, but to smash it utterly. And I've been sort of taken, sort of blindsided, I think, maybe other people may feel this way, by the relatively narrow range of discussion. A lot of discussion was wrong with the anarchists, the anarchist movement, some of which I might even agree with. But we ain't kind of the anarchists on the panel to respond to it. Would you yourself as an anarchist? All right, take it back. Still a narrow range. I'm very much puzzled by what is Jacobin? I see as a representative of a magazine, but I don't know what the politics of it. Of course, the name Jacobin sounds like you're calling yourselves revolutionary authoritarians. But what it actually stands for, I couldn't say. The main reason why, however, the occupation is so mushy, fluffy, lacking of leverage is because there was a chance to have a really mass, effective movement when Wisconsin blew up, but the union leadership and the liberals focused it all, took it away. Instead of calling general strike, they channeled it all into support for the Democrats, in the Democratic electoral action. And that's why, because the unions blew it, that's why the opposition comes out here sitting in a park. And I think one of the things that has not been discussed, which I think should be one of the central issues, we know that the liberals and the Democrats and the union bureaucrats, and I'm very much happy that the unions have participated in this as an alliance, we know that they're going to be pushing as hard as they can to direct this movement to supporting the Democrats as we get closer and closer to the elections, and they've started already. And the question, how to fight that, and how to keep it in direct action, rather than, is I think the most key issue here, which I think has been unfortunately not really raised because it will raise some other political disagreements among us.
In the back, please.
What do you think of that?
It doesn't stretch that far. You have to stand up and just talk.
Okay, I got a question then. Well, first observation, before this gentleman spoke, I found it interesting. The last person before that had this comment about the whiteness of it, and it seemed like a lot of people were uncomfortable. Nobody wanted to answer that. So if anybody wants to talk about it. But I do have a specific question. It's really kind of a two-tier thing about one of the things I'm worried, because I am excited about this. But I do think it is going to get cold. It's already getting cold, right? And there is the potential that the NYPD or whoever else, state power, is going to come in and just say, fuck this, it's over, you're done. And I'd like to hear from both sides of this, whatever you want to call it, because I don't know if it's a debate or whatever, but, you know, what people think about that, you know, what the approach should be or what the reaction should be to, you know, foreseeing that, you know, those two things coming.
Hey, can I say something? I've been down to Recession Park about 4 or 5 times, and I'm not sure that all of the people down there have a realistic appreciation of what you were just talking about. That this is not going to last forever. They seem to think that it's going to escalate and escalate and escalate indefinitely until we get rid of the corporate ruling class. I hate to throw cold water on this beautiful vision, but that's not going to happen. But there is not going to be an eternal mobilization here. So the question is, and let me ask my anarchist friend, he said the trade union bureaucrats refused in Wisconsin to call a general strike. Does he think that there is a leadership that could have called a general strike? Does he think that's a possibility? And if so, I think we should have had one. The question is, what happens when the occupation ends? The question is, what happens when the tumult and the shouting of the ecstatic moment dies? Who remains? Who maintains the continuity? Who draws the lesson? Who calls future mobilizations? You want to call this a vanguard? Call it what you like. But it's some people, and not the general mass, and not everybody. And that's called political organization, and that's what we need.
This mic doesn't stretch so far. I kind of just want to come back and address two of the questions. I guess the question about escalation, the question about kind of the composition of the protest, because I think they're kind of intertwined. The person over here was kind of speaking my language as sort of a hardcore follower of Francis Fox Piven. Don't tell Glenn Beck, please. Yeah, I think kind of what needs to do is one of the things that needs to be done is to take kind of this occupation model, which I think is good. It's a very excellent tactic, and take it out of just strictly a public space like this park and bring it institutions in which people are rooted, and occupy them and disrupt them. To disrupt a park, to disrupt traffic, the cops can get us out of there. But you know, we actually have power in the institutions we find ourselves, whether or not it's a school or a workplace or whatever. So, you know, workers should go on strike and students should take over their buildings, you know, in short. So that's that. And I think actually, if we kind of address that question of taking this kind of movement, or whatever you want to call it, into institutions in which people are actually located, you can kind of deal with the sorts of questions that people have raised about kind of the composition. If we all went to and did like a week's worth of hardcore recruiting at Brooklyn College, that problem would be partially solved. I mean, it's no.
Well, I think that's a slightly fascistic assumption that you can just recruit everyone.
Okay. Well, all right, fine. Then outreach is outreach better? Fine.
How's that been working in YES, right?
Well, you know, we do what we can. We've been going down there.
And how's it been?
The students there aren't too organized themselves, and we offer whatever support we can. And you know, that's what we should. We're not trying to take something over. We're trying to help organization that's already happening and is not off the ground yet. But yeah, I think that we need to do some more outreach and make sure that we take this into the institutions where people are located, because I think that'll deal with the questions that, or at least some of the questions that have been raised.
So far. Let me briefly just say one thing. I really want to dissent from the notion that organization and recruitment is fascist. That is just makes me want to scream. I mean, we need. The reason that the Wisconsin thing went in the direction it was because there was no alternative organization to the Democrats and the unions. They step into a vacuum and take advantage of it. You need some kind of alternative institutional structure, or you're going to see the same thing happen. It'll either evaporate or get co-opted. And this constant talk about how this is working, you know, how long? It's less than a month, isn't it? I mean, what is the metric for working? It's getting people to talk, but what happens next?
People can stop talking. I mean, you know, it gets people to talk, and then it's possible that they'll just stop talking. People, that's exactly what this movement has accomplished, and that's something that I think almost everybody agrees on, is that that's the stage at which the movement is at right now. It's gotten the entire country, or a huge part of it, talking about things that they weren't talking or thinking about before. But it's almost as if there's an idea among some people that that's an end state, a terminus. But in fact, it's totally possible, and I certainly, like everybody else here, hope it doesn't happen, that it'll fizzle out and people will just stop talking, forget about it, and go back to the problems that normally concern them, like making a living and doing well in their job and shopping and all the rest of it, and it gets forgotten. How do you prevent that from happening?
Willie, you're in the...
It's not going to reach back there, so just go ahead.
You can shout.
Hi. So, maybe I'm going to say something that's said indirectly. I'd like to say directly. We talk about it fizzling out, or the momentum not going, or just pretty much how are we going to keep this thing alive. I think it starts by using the opportunity of a lot of people coming together like this. There's a lot of people here talking about tactics, organization, thoughts, what are we going to do next, and not just philosophizing. It's very important to philosophize, talk about what we believe in. However, it's going to stop us. We may hit a brick wall because we're coming from, whether you're an anarchist, communist, liberal, whatever, I will not reveal what I am. But I know that we're all here because we know something's not up. We all know something's not working. Maybe we should talk about tactics and theories instead of showing off how big our brains are. It's very important not to be told, and I appreciate the talk, but I just wish that we could take more advantage of this opportunity to kind of collaborate and see how we can make use of the resources that we have. It's amazing what's happening there, but we do have a lot of organization and planning to do. And I mean that in the most disrespectful way. My thoughts. Thank you. I mean, not disrespectful. Oh my God. Everybody get it?
Yes.
I wanted to respond to
racial diversity first. There was this part of the 99% rhetoric that I find sort of problematic is this early when they took the park and they said, oh, we've got this liberated space, everyone needs to come down here, you know, we've really got this under our control, it's really amazing. And people concentrating like, well, maybe the drum circle's alienating to people of color, or maybe like, you know, this or that is alienating to these folks for whatever reason. When I think the cops that are ringing the park might be discouraging for folks to show up, right? Do you feel comfortable like going into a community of color and saying like, oh yeah, come to our like really like safe, secure space that's just surrounded by the New York Police Department?
What are you going to do about that?
What are you going to do about that? Well, it means you moving to different spaces than that, or holding different occupations, or actions that don't stay in one place for that long a time.
It seems like those are the kind of actions that are exactly going to put you at the greatest risk of getting into a lot of trouble with the police, and therefore would be the most off-putting to people who in their daily lives have a lot of trouble with the police, wouldn't it?
I wonder if the vagueness of the calls has something to do with it too. I mean, you're talking about people we're talking about poor people who want jobs, health care, and clean neighborhoods, and which would involve a state. And I think the vagueness and the kind of, the anarchism probably puts them off. People who are looking for public programs of a very traditional sort, they would welcome a New Deal. That's exactly the opposite of the kind of thing that we're hearing about. It's just that's too fascist, I guess.
Yeah. Which guys was first? One of you. Take you probably first. Okay.
I mean, it seems to me that the main sort of ideological division, whatever you'd like to call it, on the panel, and actually I'm curious because I think that there may be even further differences even among the two of you or even among the three of you that aren't right now articulated. I wonder, okay, so it seems to me that one of the main differences is the relationship between means and ends. Meaning that something that the two of you have been emphasizing is that in the making of this Occupy movement, you are forming a new society. You are planting the seeds, you're articulating, you're decoding, whatever you like to call it. Whereas on the other side of the panel, there's an emphasis on, well, if the goal is to overthrow capitalism, the goal is this. Like, what are the means to which one does this? And I think that there are very different sort of proposals that would be put on the table about that. Now, the problem is that, these two perspectives actually will affect the way in which this thing develops, right? Whether we like it or not. So not talking about it will mean fizzling out. The problem is that usually the way in which those disagreements take place, how they take place, is through forms of political organization. Meaning, it's not the case that political organization means that everyone has the same idea. But certainly the rejection of political organization means that these disagreements can become productive. And so the question is, I guess, to you guys, what kind of organization, if at all, is going to allow for productive disagreements, whether it be ideological, strategic, tactical, so that this movement can actually have a way of reflecting upon its actions, reflecting upon itself.
Question number 9. Well, first of all, I don't know. Let's experiment. But I do think there are a few conditions that disallow for that are at play now. So if we could address those, maybe it could be a more open possibility. The state of the square now, I know a lot of people who would be sitting on this side, if you want to call it a side, which is problematic and definitely not definitive, would not speak at the park. Because being an outright anti-authoritarian or an anarchist is not really something that people like to be live streamed across the world with a fucking police pen around you. So there is a silencing that's sort of gone on without much addressing, because to address it would be to out oneself. So if you're talking, and this also addresses the question of escalation. It's like, yes, there are a lot of people talking about many different ideas. Do they all want all of those ideas live streamed to the entire world on the assumption that everything is permitted and legal when it quite clearly isn't? So there is already a tendency in the park that leans vastly away from anti-authoritarian tendencies that don't fall into pre-existing permitted institutional structures or that can't be coded by them. So I think that would there's a problem with the way the park operates now that doesn't allow for this kind of coming together.
Well, and I think these are the disagreements we're all having are on the grounds of okay. So we're hearing from that side of the room that we're sick of all this talking. We don't want to have meetings all the time. What we really need to do is really sit down and decide on some demands. We need to talk out our demands. Or what we really need to do is organize into a structure that will do things. And these are all also conversational things, right? Whereas I think when how many of us? 6 of us up here are all on a march I don't think there's like a lot of disagreement necessarily about what we should be doing, or if there is, we can use that in productive ways or channel that. You go that way, I'll go this way. You're not on arrest. You're not someone who wants to get arrested, so we can do this. Or no one wants to get arrested. If you're not someone who can get arrested, you can do this. I don't think there's no common ground or no effort toward commonality, but an effort towards a sort of dissensus where we don't have to come to an official like statement of our commonalities. We can work those out and produce those sort of in real time.
Hello, may I? Oh.
The thing that produces solidarity over time, I just say 2 sentences, is working together on common goals. The process of reaching those common goals can often be full of dispute and may look something like generation of consensus. But you do have to come together with some goals, common goals, or the fizzling out will happen. And I just also, the idea that representative democracy is somehow authoritarian. Authoritarian would be if the cops came in and arrested all of us for having this meeting.
Yeah.
That's not the same as, this is not an authoritarian system we live under.
Hi, I'm from Brooklyn. My name's Robin. How are you? Great. So, a young woman over here a moment ago said, what can we all do? Rather than talking about philosophy. So we could debate all of this. What do we need to do? What do we need to organize and agree upon? And something, I find it strange that, I've been down there myself. And although, I don't have brown skin, I am a person of color, first of all. And I am very colorful. Thank you. I think all human beings are colorful. We need to get over the whole skin color thing. But no, I just felt that needs to be said. Why are we getting hung up on race? Well, we're all supposed to be together. That's my point. Well, okay, yes, and we can, what can we do together? Okay, let's focus on the positive. That's what I would like to do. Thank you. Why are we always on the positive? Well, I suppose it would be tedious if all we ever discussed was positive things. That would be a little mamby-pamby, but I didn't speak when you were speaking, so that's kind of rude. All right, so how about some things we can do? Make lobbying illegal in the government. Lobbying. Is this going to segue that question? Yeah. All right. How about? This feels more authoritarian than anything else. My question is, Mike mentioned ending the Fed, which is the main message of what I'm getting from people down there. Economic justice, in general, the government is bought. This is what we all agree upon. I thought, being down there myself, I'm not philosophizing right now, I'm reporting on what I saw. So my question is, why not unify behind taking action, like, for example, telling everybody to close their bank account by November 5th? Why not? Who are these naysayers? This is really gross. All right.
It's consensus. Not everything is friendly.
Oh, well, I don't know. I just, when I was down there and people are saying, let's ask the cops to join us, and people are like, I've been assaulted by a cop, but I also heard a cop say thank you to a protester or someone who is rallying. So
I think that is interesting, but I think that you've laid out the core of the question that you're asking, which is why not unify on those goals that you mentioned, which is end the Fed and lobbying and all those.
Voting reform and economic justice in general, boycotting this and boycotting that.
Right.
This isn't stretched. If anyone's been waiting to talk, then they can
Okay,
talk.
so I just want to suggest that there's actually there's really, we're making, given where the left is in the U.S., the United States right now, we're making mountains out of molehills, really. It's like we want, the commons, and we want this sort of big, to run things collectively. But A, we don't know how to do it. We don't have an ideology that has mass appeal that would get people excited about that project yet. And one of the sort of exciting things about this is that, hey, wow, maybe there's a language that's in the works that gets sort of people excited about it, and maybe there's a way of actually doing meetings and having process that gets us to a way that we can manage a commons collectively. And then, so that brings on the organization point, which is, I think that one of the things we learned in Canada was that around all these convergences was we built meetings that happened, like spokes councils that happened every month, and it was a clearinghouse for the left as a whole. And we got a space and had meetings, and everybody brought their things in, and that happened every month. And you could get conversations in a big fragmented Quebec sort of scene to happen. So I'm just suggesting that that's one of the things that maybe the Occupy Wall Street stuff could do with its money and its organizational structure and its ideological energy is like actually bring together the left energy that exists into sort of a space where it's talking like this kind of regularly and institutionally.
I want to echo the comment that we are making mountains out of molehills. I mean, revolutionary Russia had like half a century of experience with revolutionary theory and different attempts at revolutionary action, etc., etc., etc. We have 30, not even 30 days of an occupation, and occupations propping up all over the country. There's a real reason why we here don't want to say things like the Fed. I mean, I know that reason for myself, why I don't want to just say, oh, and the Fed and say economic justice. I'm afraid of demands. Because if those demands are granted, then what? Then we're stuck with the same exact...
That's right. Make more demands. Why can't you make more demands? It's not a hostage crisis. It's democracy.
Oh, but there's a... I mean, if that would work, then sure, but historically it seems to be that demands are granted, and then everything goes away.
Doesn't the opposite often happen? That people fight and fight and fight and when...
I think that like both of these, the idea that there's sort of this argument between like this insurrectionary, you know, far hard left anarchist and communist, when in fact we are in fact working together, and the reason that it's working together so far is because demands have not been made that alienate either group. When demands start being made that alienate one group or the other, it's going to be problematic, and that may in fact be not making demands, but so far neither group has been alienated, and so this idea about like we're not doing it right feels really problematic to me, because so far we're growing by using both diversity of demands and sort of traditional union action.
I'm confused. Hi, I'm Vincent. I'm very interested in how we will harness this energy and evolve this left movement. I'm also interested in reorganizing society communally. For me, my idea is that the avenue for that is that it's time for people to begin to acknowledge overpopulation as a very serious threat to everything that we are motivated to do in our lives as members of the human species, which we all are and which we all have in common. There are 7 billion of us in the world, and that's not going to go very many generations past us before we have not enough resources to be...
Total population is saturated.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that we begin to discuss this more openly as a threat in order to mobilize people which aren't motivated unless there's a threat.
Okay, we had received a question, somebody said suggestions, and that is definitely a suggestion, so I thank you for that. We have more questions. I just want to say one thing about the previous question, which was a pretty smart one, which was like, what isn't it true that the lack of demand so far has kept the movement a lot more unified than it would have been if they had come out with a 10-point plan, which actually I don't think that many people are in favor of on either side here, is the idea of the movement coming out with a 10-point plan right now. Maybe that's not true, but I think that you're missing one point, which is that it may be true that if demands were made, it would alienate some part of the movement, and therefore, if you don't make demands, no part of the movement will be alienated for that reason. But there's a third component that you're not thinking about, which is everybody outside the movement. Everybody outside the movement, who the movement is directing this towards. I mean, hopefully, the movement isn't doing all this stuff for its own personal amusement. I hope. So the rest of society that's not in the movement, for them, I think it's fair to say that demands are important. What are you demanding? What do you want? What will we get out of this? And so, the lack of demands may be uniting inside the movement, but it also can divide the movement from everybody else. That's my view.
The way you just framed demands sounds a lot like Freudian individualism. What do you want? What do you don't? What can you get out of it? So yeah, I'm sure that would appeal to a lot of people, but maybe it's not on those sort of New Labour, Clinton, like through PR and Freud type grounds of individualism that we want to start appealing as a movement of what are your demands, what can you get out of this?
I have a related question. I forgot to say. Much of a voice, but just given that. Here's my. Oh, thanks. Given that we're all pretty much on the left or anarchist, but it's the same basic values. I don't think we really have to outline what the demands are. I think it's pretty common sense what our basic values and free education, free healthcare, those type of things, which tend to be a little more socialist. So the question is, what type of advice, and it would be a practical question, do you think to get the center involved? Because really, people started looking at the movement, or soon-to-be movement, as something that was extremist and without an agenda. And I think the point of it really was to awaken consciousness. Not so much on the left, but more on the center. Who can we convince that there has been a complete broken system, and it's become more and more clear ever since the economic crisis in the last few years. So how can we get those apathetic people that could otherwise be a part of this system, not so much us, we don't have to convince each other really. So the question is, what practical steps, or how could we frame the movement so that we could recruit other people and make it a larger movement so that at some point we could get demands after consciousness has been growing?
I mean, I think a key thing isn't, we think that this is sort of the Clinton, well, maybe if we moved to the center in some way, we could attract more of it. I don't think is a program that a lot of people would get on top
I say
behind.
bring the center to us. Not
Right, so bring the center to us. I think that's great. One of the ideas is not be boring all the time, which is something that the left has like struggled with really, really hard for a long time. That even like, you know, at least certainly the academic left, but also the para-academic left or whatever socialist party you want to talk about, really just dull. And that's something like we were talking about earlier, that anarchists, anti-authoritarians, people who like, even artists, right? We've seen this. Did anyone see Occupy writers? Are there any Occupy writers in the house or whatever? Yeah. So like that's cool. They're like, that list has people that I like a lot, friends as well as idols. But like signing your name, we don't care. Like go write awesome manifestos on the side of buildings. Like put this stuff to work in a way that can attract the people. Because honestly, I've got a sense of, I think we all have a sense of this is a longer sequence than just now. And the people coming after us in the next few years, people who are like 12, 13, 10, 11 right now, are going to be looking for something and giving for them that isn't just like fighting each other for the few steps left up the ladder. So yeah, we need to put our talents to work in a way that attracts people, not just meetings. Meetings are boring.
I don't have an answer, but I see the problem as one of, are there going to be more actions that are violent, right? Is the direction a violent one? Is the direction a alliance with...
Has there been any violence?
I wouldn't say that there has, but is that necessary, right? Is that a next step, right? Because one can imagine like more like actually I would think the pepper spray, the stuff that was like week 2 when the people were pepper sprayed a lot.
No, I
was
mean
really
on the
visible.
part of the protesters.
Oh, okay. So let me be clearer. I was thinking, the way I'm trying to map this is a set of kinds of options, and are they separate from one another, or do they work with one another? And one is inviting cop violence, right? Pushing those actions. Another one is doing some kinds of violence. Is it going to be property damage or some kind of provocation? Another one is no violence, work with, keep a very strong nonviolent movement and try to work with alliances with groups like Move On More. And another one is trying to work with the Democratic Party. And the thing is that range exclusive of one another, or is the movement capable of having all of it? Or do the extreme actions alienate the other side? And I don't know the answer, but I think that that's where the tactical questions are right now. And they only make sense to be asked as tactical questions if there's a goal, right? And what are the goals? If the goal is provocation, then there can be a lot of energy, but it may not go anywhere ultimately, or it might have some sort of moral place. But if the goal is some kind of essentially taking over and reforming the state, it might be a longer process. But it also might take energized kind of actions against property to make the longer process work, because if not, people get bored with it or it goes away. So I don't know the answer, but I think that that's terrain of at least thinking about these kinds of tactics, maybe in these kind of 5 sorts, is at least a way to try to formulate the problem.
Me is that James Carville's famous thing is the economy stupid. It's like, what happens when, because right now a part of me sees this as a movement for discontent people who are out of work. What happens if for some reason the capitalist economy is on the upsurge again and people are starting to get jobs again? I mean, I'm just worried that we don't know. I'm sorry, but we don't know. And my concern is that if more people start to get jobs, more people start to get employment, I mean, will this fizzle out because of that, or
It's 5 years down the line, at a minimum.
But in those 5 years, I mean, what happens if people start getting jobs and start like settling down and start not being part of this movement?
There's such a thing as thinking too far.
So I have a recommendation and also a statement. I appreciate the knowledge that was shared by the panel. But just to step back for a moment, the mere structure of this conversation represents what we're struggling against, the 1% and the 90%. So that being said, I think that what Occupy Wall Street really did for me was really bringing the process that allowed for more egalitarian opportunities of conversation. So if anything you commit to every time there's a conversation surrounding Occupy Wall Street, Occupy whatever, is to continue that very process that came out of that movement.
Of this gathering, or the part of the 1%?
Well, I was just saying that symbolically, this conversation, the structure of it represented that very structure.
Why? Why isn't it just setting up a discussion and setting up an argument, so that in fact, basically setting up positions so that people can have a space to kind of figure them out and think. I mean, not every discussion is well structured if it's a set of one-on-one open-ended. Sometimes this kind of discussion can be useful, especially when it opens up. So I don't think that it, I guess I reject the idea that this mimics a 1% and 99%. I think that sometimes these kinds of things do, but I don't think that's a well-placed comment.
Yeah, I agree. I just wanted to say that if we would have taken half an hour, 45 minutes of that kind of intellectual exchange and then broken up into small groups to allow more people to share their kind of perspective.
Do that later. You can do that.
Okay.
You came here.
That's the recommendation.
I'd also, perhaps propose or suggest that even in the processes that go on when it is more what you're talking about of kind of a GA or working groups, that people of different backgrounds, with different privilege and different experience, feel comfortable to step forward and speak, and actually nothing about the process genuinely addresses that. Even no, we don't know where each other come from, we don't know what affects someone's confidence in standing up to speak. So I wouldn't say that the procedure of that kind of so-called horizontal discussion genuinely addresses what makes people hold a space and feel they have a place to speak from. And if you think that does, well then we're really not addressing far enough what makes people feel they have a voice and a place to speak from.
So there's a vision of sexual politics I like, where this author says, I imagine sexual politics so free that even heterosexual monogamy is acceptable. And so that's sort of how I think about meetings like this. Like, I imagine, I hope for a world so free that even a panel discussion is acceptable.
How about you, gentlemen? You in the back with the green shirt? No, I get it.
So my question goes back to what you brought up, Doug. Why is race always treated as a negative and something divisive? My question about Occupy Wall Street is how it can become more friendly to difference. And what that brings in mind is the First Nations critique that this is an occupation on occupied land. I understand that, that's not you guys all have to go back to your, ancestral homelands thing, but how do we understand one, that when we're dealing with this issue of rampant speculation and capitalist inability to deal with surplus, we're really looking at a historical continuum back from the indigenous problem. How do we, I think that, and on that note, given that it has alienated a group of people who have lodged a critique like that, how do we prevent our the organizing structure of Occupy Wall Street to continue to alienate groups like that as if they were some kind of surplus, right? So we talk about violent action. As, you know, a person of color, I already know that the system's fine with using violence against bodies that are different. Not everyone is comfortable being arrested, and not everyone, and that doesn't have the same political import for everyone. Some of us, you know, are already aware that we will be arrested just for being deviant. And that doesn't mean deviance in the form of protesting, but simply being in the streets. We're not supposed to be here.
Well, I think to answer, or try to answer your question, part of your question was, do you know about the group Occupy the Hood?
No, I don't.
They're on Facebook, and they seem to be growing by leaps and bounds. And it's two guys in Brooklyn who started it, and they started it originally as a Facebook page, and it's spreading like wildfire to other cities and they started it here in Brooklyn, spreading all around the country. The whole idea of it is to get blacks, Latinos, people of color in the movement. It seems to be extremely successful so far. I can't quantify it, but it does seem successful. So that would, to me, be one practical answer to your question. You talked about the indigenous people's critique. And you said the critique is not that. I think what you're saying is the critique is not everybody should leave because. Well, then what is the critique? I mean, what is the critique of Occupy Wall Street, other than just to say, historically there have been all of these kinds of occupations and violence perpetrated in the past. Well, okay, and so what is the critique of Occupy Wall Street?
Already, I mean, and maybe it's wrong to use a crystallizing word like critique, because when you're dealing with communities that deal with sort of disparities of privilege, it's hard to get a single voice. Why? Because we don't. One doesn't have access to an avenue. I'll shut up in a second. But essentially, so the critique is this. I think it is, we feel left out. How are you going to address our issues? You know, how do we make this comprehensive in a historical sense as well as a present sense? Right, the reservations are not that far from us right now. How do we address the way the system extends there as well? No idea?
If you're asking, I can't speak as an authority, obviously not. Like, we come together, we think of new ways to act and address deviants as people that can't but be deviants, that are interpolated as deviants, address all those issues together. Don't ask me. I can't give you an answer. We'll figure it out together.
Okay. I don't understand why it's the responsibility of us, whoever we are, to address your, whoever you are, issues. I mean, speak, express them. Well, he was speaking. I mean, I'm not just talking about the panel. I mean, talking about this movement and the organization. You know, I hear this critique so often. You're not addressing our issues. Well, who are we? And, you know, who are you? Who are your issues? Like, just speak. You know, we're not here to speak for you.
Don't just not all of us have that agency. Not all of us can come forward and speak at the panel.
Well, we can't do it for anybody else. I mean, it's, you know,
we could, though.
representation.
Great. Wait, Seth, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Actually, a question.
Bhaskar Sankara, the editor of Jacobin, plays John.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm a very good self-promoter. I didn't need him. Someone asked a question at the very beginning of the Q&A about how the sort of tone of this panel has been sort of argumentative, and how the tone at Occupy Wall Street is more less argumentative. And at first, through the first half of his question, I was sort of nodding because I'm like, yes, this is argumentative, because I sort of associate argument with politics, and I like politics and I like argument, and I think this is how we resolve differences. You know, we don't convince everyone to agree with us. If anything, that feels more authoritarian than sort of saying, this is what I think, this is what you think. So I just want to know what you guys think of the tone of this discussion, whether it's productive or not productive, or...
Personally, I think the tone is fine and great, but maybe other people would have a different impression because they may be under the impression that because people are arguing up here, we all hate each other, which, you know, or we have nothing in common. I wouldn't go to to his thing and he wouldn't go to my thing, or but that's not the case.
Well, I'm ready to make the classic anarchist mistake of teaming up with Jodi until she seizes state power and, you know, up against the wall. We'll try. This was. It's funny that it was brought up earlier because in preparation for this panel, I was reading a lot of Jodi's stuff, and having seen some talks she's given, I was like, this up against the wall, seriously. But I was having so much fun reading it and kept finding all these things that I agree with, like. I see how you get to that point where you're like, oops, I should have focused on those disagreements more at the beginning. But hopefully the structures prevent such things from happening. No, I don't think we've got any problem working together. And like I said, in the street, we're all walking the same direction.
Can I
I think this is wonderful. I think it's productive, and I think we need to have this kind of conversation. We can't duck these sorts of things. They can pretend to have a fake unity where nobody really discusses anything controversial, but that's not going to get you anywhere in the long term. I don't believe in the premature reconciliation of contradictions.
One more question, I believe this.
Sorry, I was just really quick going to piggyback off that.
Okay.
Related to the demands issue, ultimately too, I think, which is that, I mean, I agree in many ways that, like, the lack of demands both is in some ways very good to prevent co-optation by the Democrats, and it's allowed a lot of people to come together. It seems to me that the danger is just that, I mean, things like this become more practical as the movement either grows or starts to decline, where sort of like serious decisions need to be made, serious kind of paths forward need to be taken, etc. And so the question is, like, in terms of Occupy Wall Street and it's sort of looking ahead, when these things come up, will there be the kind of like the staying power and I know exactly what the word is, like the ability for people to have real arguments without feeling like they're killing one another. And that, my worry is that, you know, experiencing like the General Assembly, that's certainly not the kind of thing that happens there. And so the question is, like, in what forms can that take? On campuses, like, this could be done in places in New York City, at NYU, at New School, etc. Like, just how to encourage productive disagreement and argument that will kind of forestall disaster when sort of really important disagreements face the movement.
I think we shouldn't be doing it in the New School. I don't think we should be doing it. I love blue stocking. I don't think we should be doing it here. We should be doing it when we're all sitting in a bank together, occupying it. We need to have a combination of this discussion and this critique and action. Action. That's it.
The question from Green Shirt.
Yeah, everyone's been involved, and a lot of the speakers as well. All the speakers, all the people in the audience that spoke. I think a lot of people had some very articulate, very pertinent questions and comments. And also just this idea, just to go along with this theme and idea. We're looking at what are the commonalities, how can we continue this conversation, how can we continue this movement, how can we continue the motivation. And what I want to ask is, how do you guys see what's happening here? Like perhaps, is this just some city within the United States, or is this like a node within humanity on this planet Earth, and how is it united to Tunisia, to Syria, where people are dying every day, struggling for freedom? And how can we unite with these people, and how can we look, in a really broad level, how are we united with people struggling for freedom and egalitarianism all over the world? Especially where people's really, like you say, backs are against the wall. People are really facing serious, violent oppression. Not that people haven't been facing that here as well, just not to the same extent. And what can this look like on a broader level? How can we connect? How do you guys feel like Occupy Wall Street connect? And it certainly, obviously connects. Corporations have the power to go and impinge on other people's lives all over the world. How can we unite with these people that are affected, etc.?
I think what you're saying is great. I think that that's the question, right? I think that it's good because I think you're probably the first person tonight that brought up the point that has to be made that Occupy Wall Street is part of a continuum of movements and struggles that's been going on, that's now opened up a new possibility in the world that we didn't see 2 years ago, right? I mean, it's new and it's exciting. And I think that, I think that all we can, that just continuing to figure out how do we make the connections more permanent. I mean, I don't know the answer, but I think that this is the only way we get there, right? Is through these discussions.
On that note, is there any plans to continue this discussion in this space as a regular thing?
We don't have another one scheduled, but we have scheduling one scheduled.
I have a concrete proposal.
Okay, let's hear the concrete proposal.
Platypus, which is an educational project, wants to host these conversations on an ongoing basis, and I think that Jacobin and Politico should host them.
Interesting proposal.
I mean, meaning we have resources, so we can use them, and you guys can invite, and we can invite people, and we can host these conversations on an ongoing basis, and we can print them. We can have people whose identities want to be concealed, as long as they can continue to have these discussions.
All right, well, the Jacobin People's Revolutionary Collective will take that into consideration, and that's actually a very good idea. And on that note, I believe we are out of time and owe it to Balloon Stockings to wrap it up. There's one announcement for the bookstore that is going to be made now, and thank you very much for coming, by the way.
We're going to pass around the donations bucket because this is a fundraiser for Occupy Wall Street and also for...
They have so much money, keep it for the bookstore.
And for the bookstore, so if you want to support this totally volunteer-run bookstore, you can support us. And also an announcement about a group forming at Occupy Wall Street. There's a group of people forming a full-time working people's affinity group. Like if you work full-time but you want to be involved in the movement, like what does the movement mean outside of the square if you can't be there all the time? So if you want information about that, please come give me your email address, because not everyone could be at the square all the time, but we still want to be involved.
And on that note, I just want to say the back table, Cyrus over there is offering subscriptions to Jacobin and t-shirts, really sharp-looking t-shirts. They're $15 a piece, with the subscription $30, and they're there in the back.